So why do we want to tell the story of Bullendale? It's not just for its historical significance, although it was very significant. And it does perfectly illustrate how towns in Central Otago were not just colonial backwaters. The people here in the 1860s were well informed about global technology. Bullendale is a brilliant illustration of some of the basic principles on which the electricity industry operates. We've made the industry so complicated today that sometimes it is very hard to isolate the fundamental reasons why we do some things. And it is easier to look back to a time when the electricity industry was just getting underway and was much simpler. So what does Bullendale illustrate? Firstly, and it perfectly illustrates the transformational nature of electricity, and it is the pursuit of health, wealth and happiness that leads us to roll out electricity networks. The $10 billion a year we spend on electricity in New Zealand is massively outweighed by the benefits we get from it, and there's many transformational stories we could tell. Lighting itself has been one of the major effects in improving our lives, extending work, leisure and education. But the story we want to tell is one that also helps explain the start of our fascination with hydroelectricity, the Bullendale hydroelectric plant. Secondly, it illustrates at the most fundamental level the essence of electricity as a transport mechanism. We often think that transmission is sort of a bolt-on to the real job of generating electricity. However, the mere fact that I can transport the energy created by a generator across, in the case of Bullendale, a few kilometres of precipitous terrain, or today, hundreds of kilometres across land and sea, means I do not have to source my fuel right at the location at which I wish to consume. I simply can't transport energy that far with a mechanical system. I can transport energy by road and rail, but that is much slower and more expensive than the fast as light delivery of electrical energy. And the story of Bullendale takes us to one of the most remote pieces of terrain in New Zealand, deep in Central Otago.
We're here at the mouth of the Shotover River. We're about 15 minutes from downtown Queenstown. Now, during the times of the Central Otago Gold Rush, which started in the 1860s with the discovery of gold at Gabriel's Gully, not far from here, this river was described as the richest river in the world. Now, even today, it's probably ranked second only behind the Klondike. But during the gold rush, man's crazy appetite for gold drove them further and further up this river towards Skippers.
And after the river plots have all been claimed, the more serious miners start to look for the rock formations that fed the gold into the river in the first place, the mother lode. And a number of these rock formations, or reefs, were found and exploited at Bullendale, which was originally known as the Reefs. Of course, this drove the need for settlements to support the miners, and many of them had families. They had hotels, bakeries and even schools. And these are places we wouldn't build settlements now. They really were the back of beyond. But in the 1860s, this is where the gold was. It took about 40 years in the late 1800s to build the Skippers Road. If you hire a rental car today, you'll probably be told you're uninsured if you drive on this road. So what is still one of the most precipitous public roads in New Zealand was the only way by which these Shotover communities were connected to the outside world. And if you're on the road to Bullendale, by the time you get to Skippers, you've still got the hard part to go. We've just arrived at Skippers, way up the Shotover on the Skippers Canyon Road. It's taken just over an hour just going here direct. That's in car, although on the same road that they used. And now we're up the road to Bullendale, and this is where we pointed out it gets hard, and so we're just going to have a quick look at how hard it gets. This is still the relatively good end. Most of the road to Bullendale was really just walking track and stream bed. Most importantly for our story, it was via this road that the tons of machinery and equipment for the Bullendale hydro plant were carried in on horseback over a period of about 6 months in 1885.
But before we talk about power plants, let's roll the clock back to 1863. In just 2 short years, the gold-bearing waterways of the Shotover and its tributaries had been colonised by the gold panners, but no one had yet found any of the gold-yielding quartz rock structures that must have been there. Then, in August 1863, heavy rain caused a landslip up Skippers Creek, and Southberg, Murdoch, Jones and Olsen found the reefs. 3 years later, in 1866, there were 13 operations mining at the reefs. The miners needed a way to crush the quartz rock to get to the golden side. Most of the 13 mining operations were based around pick, shovel and hammer, which were a frustratingly slow way to extract gold from quartz. But 3 operations used what were called stamping batteries, a series of machines that crushed rocks by pulverizing them. The machines used by these operations were powered by water wheels driven by river flows. Being mechanical devices, of course, they needed to be located as close to the stamper as possible. In the case of these 3 operations at the reefs, they used the nearby flows in the Skippers and Murdoch's creeks.
By 1884, one of the largest stamping operations in the area, the Phoenix Mine, was owned by the Bullen brothers, and this area here became known as Bullendale. The Phoenix Mine was located right here at the confluence of the right branch of Skippers Creek and Murdoch's, so that the water wheel, which was driving its 20 quartz crushing stamping batteries, could make use of the flows from both. For a good part of the year, the flows in the Skippers and the Murdoch's Creek were insufficient to run the operations further upstream as well as the large Phoenix operation. A very public row erupted over water rights, and being downstream as well as having the larger operation, the Bullens were at a distinct disadvantage.
Fred Evans was the Bullen's Phoenix mine manager, and he was a technology-savvy forward thinker in his own right. While New Zealanders were at least 6 weeks by sea mail from the Industrial Revolution, they still received the latest technical bulletins and news from the newly industrialising nations of the West. Technology spread the world very quickly, and the Phoenix mine had electric lighting using a small water-powered dynamo by 1884. Fred Evans knew about electricity, and he knew what it was capable of. And he also knew that the flows in what was known as the left branch of Skippers Creek were much more consistent than the right. So he was able to envisage how electrical transmission potentially solved the problem of having reliable water flows in one place and the need for stamping power miles away in another. In November 1884, he had Walter Prince inspect the site. Walter Prince was an inspirational promoter of electricity in New Zealand. It was Prince who later talked Reefton into becoming the first electrically reticulated town in the Southern Hemisphere. We don't know whether it was Prince's promotion or the pioneering spirit already evident at the Phoenix mine, but in 1885, George Bullen decided to build what was, even by world standards at the time, an extremely ambitious project. To generate electricity at a site on the left branch of Skippers Creek and transmit it 3 kilometres over rugged terrain to the existing stamping operation on the right branch. And the first challenge was just getting the equipment to the site. A huge list of equipment had to be shipped in. 6 tonnes of electrical machine, 3 tonnes of rock crusher, 10 tonnes of casings for the stamping battery, 700 feet of large iron pipe, almost 8 miles of copper wire of 2 different sizes, insulators and poles, winding gear, a pump, rock drills, compressors and pressure vessels, corrugated roofing iron and timber. Landed at Bluff, there was a 14-day wagon haul to Kingston, then a boat shipment to Queenstown. Then it took another 3 days to do the 18 kilometres to Skippers by horse and dray. And then it was the hard bit. The Bullendale Road was a single horse track over precipitous rock faces, and much of it actually in the Skippers Creek bed. Every bit of plant was knocked down as small as it could be, but these dynamo frames were a one-piece casting, and each piece weighed 1.5 tons. We don't know how long it took to get the plant in, but we can guess it was a good chunk of 1885. In 1885, Bull and his men started by putting an intake pipe in Skippers Creek way up near that ridge. They then dug a wooden lined head race for over 2 miles across quite steep and rugged terrain and finished at the top of that cliff. 2 wires running up the cliff face operated a gate on the head race, and that's how they controlled the power onto the plant. So from the head race at the top of the cliff, they installed 2 penstocks, basically water pipes, all the way down the cliff face and jetted the water onto these double Pelton buckets on these wheels. And this whole installation was installed by Walter Prince, an early visionary, and Robert Fletcher, who was a true pioneer in the early New Zealand electricity industry. These 2 Pelton wheels drove the intermediate shaft, and then 2 belts came down to drive each of these 2 beauties. These are Anglo-American Brush Electric Light Corporation arc dynamos. Between the two they put out 40 kilowatts, 50 horsepower, and that's only about as much as we could get out of a small car these days, but at the time that was enough to power what's one of the largest stamping batteries in this region at 30 stamps. But most importantly, they put that power out at a healthy 2000 volts, and that allowed something to happen here for the first time in New Zealand and maybe the Southern Hemisphere, and that is to send the power from here way up over that ridge and over the other side. To here, the side of the Phoenix stamping battery. The Bullendale hydroelectric plant was commissioned on the 3rd of February 1886. The Otago Witness had a reporter here, and he made this report. In the battery house, mounted on a strong wooden platform, was one of the Anglo-American Brush Company's Victoria dynamos, which had been fitted up as a motor. Standing by this machine, awaiting the starting of the generator situated at a waterfall 2 miles away, we were speculating on the wonders of electricity when suddenly, as if by magic, the wheels of the motor began to move and then to buzz around with marvellous rapidity. The current had been switched on, the electric transmission of power at the Phoenix mine was an accomplished fact, and we were among the first to witness the success of what was perhaps the first experiment of the kind on a practical scale made in the Southern Hemisphere. They had quite a few commissioning problems when the plant was first started, and they had to replace some major components on the dynamos. But by 1887, the whole electrical plant was running at full power. I'm standing about where the original water wheel was. It was actually kept through the whole project as an auxiliary source of power. The Victoria motor would have been sitting about above my right ear over here. And there was quite a lot of speculation about the success of the electric system, so much so that by 1890, Fred Evans, the mine manager, felt compelled to write a report in the Lake Wakatipu Express. In that he said, "The greatest amount of energy exerted when having 7 heads of water is equal to at least 54 horsepower. The wear and tear in the machines themselves is so little beyond the brushes as to be practically not worth calculating. The brush is costing about £1 a month. The motor is given 95% efficiency, which in itself is a sufficient answer to its suitability as a power. Without any question, it must supersede steam on our rivers if they are to be made to pay." The stamping load on the hydroelectric system was up to 54 horsepower, 40 kilowatts. For context, the largest electric train motor prior to 1890 was 18 horsepower. We can't find a record of a motor larger than Bullendale's Victoria machine until 1893. It seems unlikely that there weren't similar motors around in those days, but we're quite confident in saying that the Bullendale motor was one of the largest in the world at that time.
So there you have it, the story of Bullendale. It's a story of innovation, rapid adoption of technology and just downright perseverance. It's a story of men and their families driven by a hunger for gold. But even in world terms, this little 40 kilowatt hydro generator is significant. It's possibly the largest and most significant site of its type in the Southern Hemisphere.
But it also illustrates that the principles that applied 130 years ago also apply today. Just like the owners of the Phoenix gold mine, we need to use energy where we need to use it. And if we want to use the best hydro, wind and geothermal resource to power our lives, well, these resources can be many, many miles away from our cities, towns, factories, offices and homes where we choose to live. Electricity freed us from the mechanical linkage that meant that we had to compromise, not use so much energy or live next to an energy source or find resources that were near an energy source. That really unlocked our ability to harness energy, and that has had an immense transformational effect on our society. In 1893, George Bullen sold the mining interests at Bullendale to the Achilles Mining Company, but the mines at Bullendale were never particularly profitable, and in 1901 the intensive mining stopped and the town of Bullendale disappeared. Because of the shortages during World War I, much of the valuable material at Bullendale was pillaged: brass, copper, even corrugated roofing iron. But because the cast iron components were so big, so heavy and so remote, they remained on site. Which is why the bones of a 19th century technological marvel are enshrined here, which in the 21st century is still one of the most pristine, rugged and beautiful spots you'll find anywhere.
I wonder why I'm always lonesome, and what the trouble can be. Most fellows find their mate, but it just seems like fate has made a monkey of me. I'm like a raindrop in a cloud.